Alright guys, this is more or less an Navmesh tutorial, at least a pre and setup for it first. So I'll kind of probably do this in parts. So we have a conquest map here that we'd like to make single player oriented, and that would be our no LMain. Uh, when you open the map, a conquest map, never been supported with AI, co-op, or any single player entity stuff, is going to basically not have an AI in its server zip. So what I've done here is extracted the map for editor use. Um, and I removed the zips just for cleanliness so you can see the expanded files without anything extra. So anyways, what you're going to want to do is find a level that has something of an AI to it so that we can use a couple of files need to be ported in. So I'm going to use one that we've been using for test and see stuff. And basically you want to copy the folder AI. It normally would come in the server zip if you're stealing it from an existing map that's been done and production wise ready. But you need to find an AI folder that contains this AI.ai. That's the extension .ai, not to be confused with AI strategic areas or any of that shit. This is the controls for this file here is the controls for the Navmesh. It determines max slopes that get meshed, the radius, how tightly it gets meshed, and then of course the clusters that are associated with that mesh. When it gets converted to pathfinding, it's going to need these. So very important to have enough, all the clusters there, because then that way if you ever want to modify the map later, the Navmesh will support whatever vehicle you put on it. For instance, if you just put tank, you won't be able to get armed car AI type controlled vehicles or landing craft AI controlled vehicles to work. They'll just sit there and sit there. They won't go anywhere. They won't do anything. So these are very important to have. Your radiuses, if you get them too tight, you're going to end up with a high poly mesh and super accurate, but the offset is that. And especially on vehicle, if you make the radius too small, so you say I change that to what the radius is here, you're going to end up with such a tight mesh that they're going to be driving into obstacles and stuff trying to go around a corner thinking that they're a lot smaller than they really are. So when you've got a 6 meter wide tank trying to go through a 2 meter area because he thinks he's smaller than he is, that's bad juju. So generally keep it at the 3 range. 3 to 3.5 is stock, I think, for the radius. Stock for infantry is, I think, 2-3. You can tighten it up if you're having trouble with the mesh, but I usually start off with that. Now your max slope will determine how steep of a slope, and if you get it too steep, of course the infantry won't even be able to walk up that steep slope, but you're putting mesh there, it's kind of pointless. So I'm going to drop this down to something like 38. And then the same thing with vehicles generally are way worse. They can't really go up slopes that infantry can, so that should be considerably smaller. We're going to start with this for our settings just to see what happens. So I'm going to basically save that, even though it's in this other map at the moment, but I don't really care. So we'll copy this over to the other map because we're going to need it for that map. So now Alamain is right here. I'm going to paste that in. Okay, so here's that. So now what we're going to want to do, and if your map doesn't play in Conquest or it's got a problem in Conquest, it certainly you won't be able to do any AI related stuff. So we're going to generate the AI through the editor for the strategic areas, which often goes in here. If you've got a map that's got existing strategic areas and a mesh already, you can often rob it from the game mode, and there'll be the AI file here, which I generated one earlier, so we're going to do it from scratch as if it was straight Conquest and it never came with any AI files. So on we go. So we've added our AI folder with our AI script that controls nav meshing. We'll open the editor up and we'll get it set up for strategic areas, which is one of the most confusing things to do in the setup for AI. And then basically creating our neighbors, our infantry, and order positions, in the strategic areas themselves that are placed on the flags. So I'm going to stop the recording for the moment, and then we'll go on to the next video, and that'll be when we're in the editor.